Hello everyone, welcome to another video of this revision series. In this video, we'll talk about basal ganglia. Actually, the term basal ganglia is a misnomer because a true ganglion is a cluster of nerve cells present in the peripheral nervous system. But in case of basal ganglia, what we are talking about, it is a cluster of nerve cells inside the brain. So in a better term, it should be called as basal nuclei. And the nuclei are mainly 5 types: chordate nucleus, number 2 putamen. Both this chordate nucleus and putamen form striatum. Globus pallidus, it has both internal and external segment. Number 4 is the subthalamic nucleus, and number 5 is the substantia nigra, which again is divided into pars compacta and pars reticulata. Now there is a circuit in between these various types of nuclei, and the circuit seems like very complicated, but it's not so complicated. It's actually simple. In between these nuclei there is striatum, and it receives 3 afferents from 3 parts. From substantia nigra pars compacta, it receives neurons via nigrostriatal tract. From cerebral cortex, it receives afferent via corticostriate projections, and from thalamus another projection to the striatum. It also sends 3 efferents, one to the external segment of globus pallidus, another to the internal segment of globus pallidus, and another to the pars reticulata of the substantia nigra. And thalamus have 2 inhibitory input from internal segment of globus pallidus and pars reticulata, and it has 2 efferents, one to the striatum and one to the cerebral cortex. Before we go further into the discussion related to these various tracts, first the functions of this basal ganglia should be clear. And the main function of the basal ganglia is to maintain the cognitive control of movements. In another word, the planning and programming of the movement or the fine movements of the motor functions. And this is mainly achieved by higher centers that control the cortical motor functions. So if there is any damage to any tract in between the nuclei, there will be loss of fine motor. And we will also discuss 2 diseases like Parkinson's disease and Huntington's chorea. Now the tract. There is mainly 2 types of tract, one shown in intact line, another in the broken lines. The broken line means the inhibitory types and intact line is the excitatory types. Actually dopamine is the main neurotransmitter, but the site of action, that is the receptors, are varied. Thereby it will either cause excitatory input or inhibitory input. When dopamine acts on the D1 receptor, it will act like excitatory stimulus, and when it will act on the D2 receptor, it will act as inhibitory stimulus or inhibitory input. Thereby there are various inhibitory input from striatum to the internal segment and external segment of globus pallidus. The direct pathway constitutes the internal segment, whereas the indirect pathway constitutes the external segment. And finally, the internal segment will internal segment has inhibitory circuit to the thalamus, but it will ultimately become the excitatory. How? Because striatum is itself inhibitory to the internal segment, and thereby nulling the inhibitory effect. So 2 corresponding inhibitory making a excitatory input actually. So this is a direct pathway, how striatum is excitatory to the thalamus. Similarly, in the indirect pathway, there is a subthalamic nucleus in between the external and internal segment, and from external segment it is inhibitory to the subthalamic nucleus, but subthalamic nucleus is excitatory to the internal segment and striatum is inhibitory to the external segment. So two inhibitory input making actually a excitatory input. Thereby striatum will stimulate subthalamic nucleus or send stimulatory input which actually stimulate the internal segment. But as it is already being inhibited, so there will be excitatory stimulus to the thalamus and thereby it will cause activation of the cerebral cortex. So by various interruption of the nuclei, the fine control is achieved. Now if there is some damage to any tract, like when there is degeneration of the dopaminergic nigrostriatal tract to the substance from substance nigra to the striatum, the disease is called Parkinson's disease and it has various types of clinical feature. Some are hypokinetic like akinesia, bradykinesia, stony expression of face, or some are hyperkinetic like cogwheel rigidity, lead pipe rigidity, tremors, etc. And the treatment is mainly dependent upon the amount of dopamine and it is achieved by L-dopa or anticholinergic drugs. And in case of Huntington's chorea, it is the degeneration of the cholinergic and GABAergic neurons that lead to the chorea or tremor-like movement. So this is a very schematic discussion about the circuits of the basal ganglia mainly, and the main function of this basal ganglia is to achieve cognitive movements. So this is a very basic idea about basal ganglia. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, please let me know in the comment section and stay tuned for further videos.